Hey guys, it's Andy, and today I wanted to give you all sort of a taste of what our history camps or our history classes will be like at QB Camp. So without further ado, I'll read this toss-up. If y'all can get it early on, that's great. Yell out the answer, just don't bother anyone else. And here we go. Farming in the capital city of this empire was performed on floating gardens called chinampas. This empire fought the flower wars to gain captives, and some of its aspects were chronicled in the Florentine Codex. This empire was formed from the unification of three cities into the Triple Alliance, but collapsed shortly after the events of La Noche Triste. According to legend, its Nahuatl-speaking founders saw an eagle eat a snake at Lake Texcoco, where they built their capital Tenochtitlan. For 10 points, name this empire ruled by Montezuma II, which was conquered by Hernan Cortez. Okay, so if y'all didn't get the answer, that's fine. It is the Aztec Empire. Okay, so a few of the really important clues so in the beginning, they have these things called chinampas. Basically, the Aztecs lived or their capital city, Tenochtitlan, was on a lake, right? So really an island in the middle of a lake. And it's kind of hard to grow in a lake normally, but what they did is they dredged up all the really rich dirt at the bottom of the lake, and they pulled it up, and this dirt was had a ton of minerals and whatnot into it. So they were able to plant their crops in these basically floating piles of dirt that they dredged up from the bottom of the lake. And because it was so rich, they were able to plant multiple crops a year on these patches of dirt, which were called chinampas. And this was really helpful for them because it ties into a bunch of the other things that they do. So they were warriors, right? So it talks about the flower wars, where basically what would happen is, in order to keep the gods happy, the Aztecs would go out and terrorize neighboring villages or neighboring tribes and capture people in order to sacrifice as tributes to the gods. And so what really helped them is that these chinampas were so productive that they were able to grow a ton of food to feed all their warriors. So what's also really interesting about the Aztecs is the Aztecs aren't actually a single group of people. There are actually three different groups, and the main one that we think of are the Mexica. So that's also a good proper clue to know, or a proper noun, to know, is that because they're made of several groups, the main ones that we think of are the Mexica, but they're actually not the only ones, and it was an alliance. And so we can get, that's kind of useful, the Florentine Codex as well. So what happened after, so skipping ahead, right, at the end it talks about how Hernan Cortez conquered the Aztecs, right? And afterwards we got a lot of records about the Aztecs from these codices, basically, which were written down by Spanish settlers or priests often, who were trying to capture some of the culture of this empire that they were basically taking over, right? Okay, other things. So again, this Triple Alliance that we talked about is kind of important to know. La Noche Triste is when, I'm sorry for my terrible Spanish pronunciation, but that's when the Spanish came, or specifically Cortez, right? He came and he took over Tenochtitlan, pretending to be friends. If you haven't heard the story, they actually thought that he was one of their gods that was coming back. I mean, when they initially saw the Spaniards mounted on their horses, they thought it was one being. And I mean, they didn't remember that in the Americas you don't really have any beasts of labor. I mean, in the Andes they have llamas, but the Aztecs didn't really have any beasts of labor. So seeing horses and seeing people shoot guns, they thought this was magical, right? So they thought these were their gods that were coming. And I mean, seeing a person on a horse is kind of astounding as it is, and then seeing the whole rifle thing is also pretty incredible. So they thought they welcomed in these visitors that they thought were their gods, and then the Spanish obviously massacred them. And the other important thing is that they actually had a ton of local support, because again, with the Flower Wars, the Aztecs were kind of hated by all their neighbors, and so with that, the Spaniards were actually able to gain a ton of support from the locals, right? And the way they communicated was there was a person called La Melanche. who is a very famous figure, who she had one of Cortez's children, and also served as the translator for Cortez. She picked up Spanish somehow, and then would translate for all the other like native followers of Cortez who were trying to go and fight the Aztec with them. Okay, so Nahuatl is a pretty good thing to know. That's just the language that they spoke. And then this other story, so we have, if you've looked at the Mexican flag, right, you see that it's, the three stripes, and then in the middle there's this logo of a cactus, and then there's a bird on top of this cactus with a snake in its mouth. And that's actually derived from this Aztec story where, so before the Mexico were these like super powerful warriors, we believe that they were actually kind of kicked around, and like sort of these outcasts that like everywhere they tried to settle, the people who were already there would kick them out. So we think that they, if we have a map, right, we have Mexico down here. This is roughly where Mexico City is, right? This is southwest U.S. And we think that they came from out up here and they got kicked around a ton, and then they kept migrating out until they reached this lake. And according to their mythology, they were supposed, or this legend anyways, they were supposed to settle where they saw an eagle land on a cactus in the middle of a lake, and it was supposed to be eating a snake, and that happened to be on Lake Texcoco, which is where Mexico City is. So Mexico City is actually built on the ruins of Tenochtitlan, and that means it is also built on a lake. And fun fact, Mexico City is sinking into the lake bed. So all good clues to know. And Montezuma, of course, is the guy who was emperor and who welcomed in the Spaniards and then got slaughtered by them. And so that's about it for the Aztecs. Hope you learned something. If this was useful to you, please consider registering for QB Camp, and I hope to see you soon.